Good morning, 822 News Talk 99.7, WNTK, WNTK.com, News Talk 98.9, and 1490 WUVR. Kevin's forecast from Storm Watch 9. Some sun and clouds, chance of a thunder shower later at 78. Drier air in here tomorrow. It's nice, partly sunny, and a high at 74. Right now, 66 with clouds at WNTK, WUVR. Welcoming Congressman Charlie Bass to our studios again. Congressman, good to have you back here again.
I'm glad to be here.
You come for our great coffee, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. I've really been enjoying it. I don't even see a coffee cup, let alone coffee. Hey, by the way, that caller that you he wasn't a caller. He was
Paul Huntley from Money Matters.
Yeah, Money Matters.
Said that the Congress voted to raise the debt ceiling and then took a vacation. Well, I don't know whether. Are you on vacation right now?
No.
Am I on vacation right now? I got 8 meetings today, 7 yesterday, about 8 or 9 tomorrow.
And you're going to be in the area today, right, Congressman?
It's correct. From here, basically, to Newport. I'm in New London right now, and it's interesting because yesterday I was in the Salem, Windham area, and people, one after the other, says, "You guys ought to stay out of Washington, man. You know, you ought to be back here, cut their pay, send them home, and all this stuff." And then I hear the guy on the radio saying, "Well, they left Washington, and that's bad." So what do you do? You know,
yeah.
The fact is that we had to, we got the message last year that we've got to cut spending, and I have to say, although it's not the bill that we passed last week is not what I wanted, but I'm not dictator for a day. It is an effort which I think will be successful to significantly reduce the growth of government. Everybody knows we have to do that, and I don't think ever in my lifetime has a U.S. budget been mandated by law to be less one year than it was the year before, and that's what's going to happen with this plan. The amount of money spent on discretionary spending, that's not entitlements, will go down next year from this year's level significantly.
Congressman Charlie Bass in the studio with us. Your questions for the Congressman, 888-299-3151. You can call now at 888-299-3151 at WNTK. Congressman, in voting for this bipartisan plan to raise the debt ceiling, there are a lot of vocal Americans out there. Latest survey out, CBS, New York Times, 84% of Americans angry with Congress. Those who voted to raise the debt ceiling, imperfect as it may be, are being vilified by these people saying, we'll get them in the next election. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I'm not here to win elections. That ended a long time ago for me. I was out of Congress for 4 years. I know that there are a lot of good things in the world that one can do other than public service. I came back because I knew that something had to be done to save this country for my children and yours and others. And I knew the votes would be tough and controversial. And Americans are frustrated and angry on both sides of the aisle because they know we have a situation that is on the verge of getting to be out of control. They know that tough decisions are going to make. They don't like the results of the decision, i.e. cutting programs that they want and like. On the other hand, they don't like where they are with huge deficits and the potential for the downgrading issue that we've just had, which may continue to plague us over the next few years. The country is like a business in a workout situation. We have our assets are gone because we have debts that are almost equal to what our gross domestic product are. 2 years ago, our debt to, shall we say, income ratio was about 40%, and now it's over 80%. That's just 2 years. So no wonder people are unhappy with the Congress. We can't solve problems by wishing. We have to work to make it happen, and it's a messy process. I'm prepared for it, but if the people of this country decide that they don't think that the efforts that we have made are the correct efforts, so be it. That's fine. But my feeling is that Americans want economic recovery. They want courage and leadership in Washington. They're not. I haven't been blaming the Obama administration or the George Bush or the Republicans or anybody else for the situation we're in now, any more than if I were running a business, I'd spend all day long worrying about what the past employees did that was wrong to get us in the situation we're in now. We got to move forward, and we're going to do that step by step. Day by day, and we will. This country will be strong, and it will be successful. It will be prosperous, and it will be secure. But it's not going to be fun getting there.
Great analogy with the business. Congressman Charlie Bass here, 888-299-3151, our number this morning at News Talk 99.7 WNTK. Take us back about a week and a half ago when this vote was coming down. We were watching through the weekend amazing political theater, people saying, well, I'm not compromising, finger-pointing, name-calling. What was it like? You were there. What was it like?
Not only was I there, I was actually in the chair a lot of the time. And it's the way unfortunately, it's the way all representative democracies or consensus governments work. People argue and have different opinions, which are legitimate. Decisions are never made until they're absolutely necessary. I mean, that's the way it works when you're studying for exams in college. You do the hardest studying near the very end. And so for me, I'm not surprised that it happens this way. I remember back when in the 90s and the early 2000s, every single time the Congress was getting ready to break for a July 4th recess or whatever, we'd stay up all night the night before, even though we'd been there for 2 weeks working, from 9 to 5. Everything got done in the last day, so that doesn't really concern me that much. That's just human nature. These are huge decisions, though, and they were, I think, in the end, as I said earlier, I wasn't satisfied with the final plan. Cut, cap, and balance was my preferred vote. But Republicans only have one seat at a 3-seat table, and we also have the obligation to lead. The U.S. Congress does. The Senate hasn't produced a budget. The Senate hasn't produced, as far as I can tell, a single appropriations bill. The Senate doesn't dare, because they know that the kind of product that they would produce would really create an uproar in America, because they can't cut a budget. They don't know how to do it.
2nd District Congressman Charlie Bass joining us in studio. Jim MacKay, John Harper, in the WNTK Morning Show at 8:29 this morning. Congressman, we actually have a caller on the line right now. Bruce in the car. Bruce, welcome to WNTK.
Morning, Bruce.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Good morning, Charlie. I was listening to what you were saying, and when you were talking about the new bill that's just been passed last week, and you said it was going to decrease the growth of government.
Correct.
Or slow the growth of government.
Correct.
I think that what the average voter is really looking for right now is to decrease the size of government.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean,
well, Bruce, let me just say that the budget, as you know, is divided into 2 big categories. Spending that we control by appropriation every year, that's called discretionary spending, and then non-discretionary spending. 66% of the budget is controlled by changes of law, which you obviously can't do very effectively, at least in a debt limit increase. However, and you know how controversial entitlement reform is: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and so forth. And that is where the real problem lies. And it's unfortunate that those who are not really interested in solving this problem have used it as a political football, misstating my votes and other people's votes, grossly misstating them. It doesn't move this process forward. We know, and I would assume you would agree with me, that the entire size of government needs to be reduced. This super committee that was obviously a compromise measure proposed by Senator Reid is going to have the responsibility of coming up with $1.5 trillion worth of reductions in spending, much of it on the entitlement or non-discretionary side. And that is where you're going to see some serious debate and a serious, some tough votes on programs that people really value. And I understand that. But again, presumably this committee will come up with the recommendations, and they'll be bipartisan, because if they don't, then the law says that there will be an automatic across-the-board cut. As I recall, it's 5%, including everything. Everything will be cut, including defense and all the things that a lot of Republicans like. So failing to make these budget reduction goals could be really ugly.
Bruce, thank you for your
Yep.
call at 888-299-3151 to speak with Congressman Charlie Bass, 832 at News Talk 99.7 WNTK and WNTK.com. Defense spending, Congressman Bass, has always been the sacred cow. Don't touch that, as we've had a number of guests on the radio program this week who have said, well, when you go into the defense budget, we're still spending money on weapons that were designed to fight the Soviet Union back in the 1960s. We should be cutting defense spending. How do you attack that sacred cow?
Well, first of all, for me, it's not a sacred cow. I'm a budgeteer, if you want to call me that. I served on the budget committee for 8 years. We used to review defense spending just like any other agency, and I believe that the defense budget should be on the table right next to every other budget. I feel strongly about that. There isn't, the Pentagon doesn't have a lock on perfection and efficiency. We all remember the $600 hammer or whatever that was. That hasn't gone anywhere, and there's no reason why, especially if we're going to, over the next couple of years, reduce our presence in Afghanistan, why we can't look to the defense budget for savings, unnecessary spending, waste, and so forth. And these authorizing committees ought to be spending a lot of time working on this, not so much time trying to figure out where to spend money, but where to save it. Harry S. Truman would not have become president of the United States had he not been appointed by the Democrats during World War II. Democrats didn't like him. He was in the U.S. Senate. They didn't like him. They made him chairman of a commission that was responsible for cutting defense spending in the middle of World War II, and they figured that would be the end of him. The Truman Commission ended up finding waste in the defense budget, which saved a lot of American lives during World War II, because we were able to buy other things that made our troops safer. So I feel very strongly that being for cutting the defense spending doesn't mean you're against national security or against protecting our troops any more than you're against education or housing if you're looking for waste, fraud, and abuse in those departments.
Crazy question. Is it possible to get a pragmatist like Harry Truman elected again?
Well, I think there are a lot of pragmatists in Washington.
Who are some of the pragmatists?
Well, I'd like to think I'm not running for president, obviously, but there are a lot of people that are. I think John Boehner is pretty pragmatic. I think a lot of the committee chairmen have to be pragmatic because they have to work on both sides of the aisle. We may have a majority, but remember, there are only about 3 or 4 extra Republicans on each committee, and in order to get the business of the Congress done, you've got to be pretty pragmatic. And despite what you hear on national TV and radio and so forth, Republicans and Democrats do negotiate and talk over almost every single bill, for example, that comes up in my committee, which is the Energy and Commerce Committee. There may be rancorous debate, but pragmatism is and also being willing to listen is an essential part of being successful in the Congress.
Heard a caller yesterday, Congressman Bass, on the Howie Carr show that we carry at 3 o'clock on WNTK saying, those people in Congress, they don't really want to fix the problem. Do you really want to fix the problem, or is this just more about posturing and
I wouldn't
bickering?
be here. I wouldn't even have considered running for Congress last year had I not had a goal in mind, and the goal was to be part of a process of turning this spending frenzy around, getting the economy turned around, getting people back to work. And when that starts to happen, or when it does happen, my job will be done. I'm here to solve problems and to work not only with my colleagues on the Republican side but across the aisle to make progress. It's not the battle. It's the result that I'm interested in.
Congressman Charlie Bass, our guest on News Talk 99.7 WNTK and WNTK.com. It's 8:35 on this Wednesday morning with a chance of showers later on and a high near 74. Has this entire process, the negotiation over raising the debt ceiling, done irreparable harm to the Republican Party, or has it just done irreparable harm to both parties?
I don't think it's done irreparable harm to either party. It's interesting to see how interesting the editorials have been concerning this. Clearly, some conservatives were very disappointed with the vote and thought that there should have been a lock-in-place constitutional amendment sent out to the people of this country. I agree with that, and I wish it had been in there. There were others that wanted this and that, and the Democrats were furious with President Obama because they thought he sold out to their base because there's the potential, because we're not raising taxes, and yet Joe MacKay, the publisher of the Manchester Union Leader, put out an editorial over the weekend, in essence, praising those of us who supported this plan, basically because we are moving this battleship we call America around to a different course, and you can't pivot on its axis. You have to turn it slowly, and we're working on that. And by this time next year, I think you'll look at it this way. Every single person who gets up to defend a program, and I see it in the district and I see it amongst my colleagues in Washington on the Democratic side, they all start out by saying, we've got to do something about the deficit. And you know what the next word is? But. I call them Me Too buts. However, the fact is that that would never have been even on the table now had the voters not spoken last November and changed the leadership of Congress.
2nd District Congressman Charlie Bass, our guest on WNTK. You can join in the conversation, 888-299-3151 at 8:37. Peter's in the car. Peter, good morning. You're on with Congressman Bass on WNTK. Go ahead.
Good morning, Charlie.
Morning, Peter. How are you today?
Alive and well.
Good.
I'm headed to Concord. Charlie, I want to first compliment Kelly Ayotte for voting no. I know that's something difficult, but I understand where you're coming from, but I hope you've now recognized we're now obligating ourselves coming up to $7 trillion to $10 trillion more, which is impossible for us to sustain. And the game you're calling is yes, but. The way to get out of the yes, but game is you don't play the game in the first place. You sit down and say, we can't do this any longer. People in New Hampshire are saying, Charlie, what's going on? We cannot afford to continue this debt. It's not practical in our home budgets. How is it possible to do it down there? You got to someday say no.
Well, Peter, the irony of your question is that I agree with you, and I respect Kelly Ayotte's vote, and it could easily have been my vote as well. I won't say that a no vote was the easy vote, but I would have hated to see what happened this week on international markets had we been in real default, technical default, not meeting. I mean, all this money that came out of the stock market went into Treasury bills, as your stock guy said before the hour. I'd also point out that this is not the end of the debate. It's not over now. We are going to do a lot more if we possibly can, and we will begin that process in September. And I agree with you that we can't sustain this growth. Growth of government. I voted for the Ryan budget and have been roundly criticized for it, which seeks to reduce the growth of government by $6 trillion over the next 10 years and still doesn't balance the budget during that period of time. So we really are, I can't agree with you more. We're in a tough situation, but we also have to lead, and we only have 1 seat of 3 at the negotiating table right now, and the consequences of not being able to get the work of the government done are sometimes more severe than not getting everything we want. And that was
Charlie,
the hard decision that I had to make, and Kelly made it differently, and I really very much respect her for that.
Charlie, you got to get the money into the private sector instead of continually funding government.
I agree.
Because all it is an expense side, and we got to get the income side back under control. And to do these stimulus plans to continually fund, I would say, union voters and also the government people is just draining the rest of us. We have to pay that bill. It doesn't make any sense. So
I agree with you.
And fund private enterprise back again and get this country back on the road.
Well, we are going to, in September, begin a process of tax reform, and it's going to consist of a plan primarily to make our employers better able to compete with employers elsewhere around the world. It's going to be complicated. It will not be. We're not going to raise the deficit, but what we will probably do is lower the corporate tax rate and offset it with a broadening or limiting, whichever way you look at it, of deductions that corporations get. We have the second highest corporate tax rate in this country. We tax foreign income. Most other countries don't do that. If we can change these rules and make our tax system more competitive, I would suspect that we could see as much as $1 trillion worth of assets come back into the United States that are currently parked overseas. That will put people back to work. That will put the private sector more in charge of economic revitalization.
Peter, thank you for your call and great points. We appreciate it. With Congressman Charlie Bass at 841 on WNTK WUVR. Speaking of that, throughout this month of August, Congressman, you're meeting with a number of business owners, employees. You're doing that today in the Lake Sunapee region to talk about how Congress can make it easier for the private sector to grow and create jobs. How do you do that? What are you going to do to make it easier?
I just touched on it a second or so ago. First of all, getting back to Peter's comment, Congress, people, we have to stop turning to the federal government to answer every single problem or to resolve every problem that we have.
Good point.
The federal government needs to create an environment that is conducive to people having an opportunity to do well. And that's what our focus is going to be, making sure that we are no more confiscatory on the regulatory side as well as on the tax side than anybody else, that we encourage investment from or increase investment in our industries and employers in this country and not elsewhere around the world. But you know, this sort of mantra that every time the economy stutters, that the Congress has to come up and take money that belongs to your children and my children and give it to people in order to keep them happy. We've got to stop that approach. And I know that the president will come up with a whole series of plans for stimulus that involve increasing spending, and we're going to have to resist that and try to set ourselves to creating an environment where people actually get hired and pay taxes. That's the best way to get the deficit under control, to reduce the cost of government, and to recreate the prosperity in this country that we've been lacking for the last 3 years.
2nd District Congressman Charlie Bass joining us on WNTK and WUVR at 8:43 this morning. We've got him for a couple more minutes. We also have another caller, Congressman. We have Steve in Grantham. Steve, welcome to WNTK.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
I'm happy you touched on tax reform, but it's something that, there's a number of areas. But in terms of tax policy, it doesn't seem to me that the Republican Party is serious about deficit reform if you're not willing to realize that tax revenue as part of the way to reduce the deficit is an important feature, and that would include tax reform also. But if the Republican Party says we can't increase taxes at all, even through tax reform, or taking away hedge fund managers or carried interest at 15%, then I just don't think it's a political stunt rather than a serious trying to ultimately balance or reduce the deficits that we have as a country.
Steve, I say everything should be on the table. I've said that from the beginning. I'm not going to vote to raise taxes because I think it hurts rather than helps solve the problem. But I've never said zero, never, ever, ever at all. The fact is that tax revenues in this country are down around 15% of gross domestic product, and spending is at about 25%. That's why we have the deficit. However, how do we get here? Well, part of it, of course, is reduced revenue because of the bad economy. But the other part of it, and some portion, not a lot, but some portion is due to the tax relief that was passed in the early 2000s. But even the Obama administration's economic forecasts show that tax revenues are going to go up to 18 to 19%, which is where they should be, very quickly, but that spending is going to go up by even more. So I say to guys like you who call in with a legitimate point, show me the money first on the spending side, then talk to me about taxes, because right now the problem that this country has is spending. The budget has gone from about $1.5 trillion when I entered Congress in 1995, $2.5 trillion when I left Congress in 2006, and now it's $3.5 trillion just 4 years later. And even we talked about defense a minute ago. Defense was about $260 billion in 1994. These wars that we've suffered through in the Middle East have cost us a lot of money. We got to reduce our presence over there and use that money for savings, not for more spending. We have to work on the issues of entitlements and also discretionary spending. And then if we can do that and we see where we are, then figure out what a decent balance is. But right now, raising taxes is probably about the worst thing we could do, especially on the sector of the economy that's actually putting the money into the economy to create the jobs.
Second District Congressman Charlie Bass. And Steve, thank you for your call in Grantham this morning. We want to keep you on schedule. We thank you for your time. The Congressman today in Sunapee, Newport, Claremont, Cornish, and Walpole, visiting a number of local companies, talking about job creation, also meeting with seniors today in Newport, among a number of other things. And we thank you for the generous amount of time you've given us this morning on WNTK. Need anything? Just pick up the phone. We'll put you on the radio. It's the fastest way to get in touch with the constituents here in the Dartmouth Lake Sunapee region. And Congressman, thanks again.
It's always a pleasure.